Okay, everyone, welcome to part three of our video exercise for this week, which is about converting a website to a mobile site, a little bit more advanced. Okay, um, so basically, just to recap what we've done two things. First, if you remember, this is the site we are working with, okay, from a couple weeks ago. And in essence, a couple of the things we did was we decided that we were going to change these graphics here, right? And these graphics essentially were put in place with an image tag in our HTML. Let me just get this out of my way here. As you can see, these were an image tag before, but now, in order to change them with a media query for the mobile site, we would need those to be put in place with style sheets. So what we did was we adapted the site kind of using similar techniques that we looked at regarding sprites, and we kind of put that in place so that these images were actually done with CSS instead of structural HTML. And then we actually added a hover effect on there to make it a little bit more interactive. Okay. And then second thing we did was we started to deal with the typography. So the type that we use in this example, the font Impact, is a fairly common font, but basically it kind of is not so common on a mobile device, and mobile devices don't have as many fonts as computers have. So we talked a little bit about how we were planning on bringing this custom font into our design, and I reviewed with you the CSS necessary to create a custom font using the @font face selector. And we talked about the type of fonts that you can use in an actual browser. Okay, and there's three different competing types we talked about. Well, four really, but one of them is kind of only for Internet Explorer. The EOT format, and then we talked the Web Open Font format, and then we talked about the TTF format, okay, which is probably the most common format, the true type font. And then we talked about the SVG font, which is primarily used for iOS devices, okay. So we also talked about different ways that you could get fonts, and I recommended using a Font Squirrel, which is a really good site to get fonts from. And we talked about how to implement this in the CSS. So there's that part of it. Okay. So now at this point, we are ready to proceed with our conversion over to a mobile design. Now, if you recall back from our original exercise, on mobile media queries and mobile design, one of the things I said was that you needed to have a special meta tag in the header section, right? And so I'm going to put that in now. So it's meta, and the name of that meta tag is the viewport tag, okay? And basically, the value of that is you need two things. One is required, and it's the minimum you can have, but we're going to put in two. So we're going to put in width equals device width. Okay, that's going to make the width of our browser be the same as the width of the device. Okay, on a computer, that's not always the case. The browser can be bigger or smaller than the device of the width. But when we start talking about media and talking about, when we start talking about mobile devices, okay, you don't get to minimize the browser or have multiple windows open on your phone. Pretty much when you open a browser, it's the whole width of the screen. So we need to define that here in this media, this meta tag, okay? And then the other thing I'm going to put in is basically this initial scale. And I'm going to set that to be 1. Okay, now that's the default. Okay, but sometimes on phones, if you don't put it, it might make it bigger or smaller depending on the device you have. If you're using a Retina device, which can display more pixels. I just did notice I have a typo here, TENT, right? And so then when I'm done with that, I'm going to put that in. And also this will, jumping around, this will help the way my fonts look when they render in the mobile view. They'll be crisper, okay? So first things first, in preparation of writing the mobile style sheet, we basically need to put in this meta tag, okay? And once we have that, then we're ready to actually go into our CSS here and write our media query. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go all the way to the end of my media query, okay? And I'm going to put in the @media selector, okay? And I'm going to make this for just screen devices, right? And then I'm going to put in, this time I'm going to put in 2 qualifications. I'm going to put in 2 condition tests, right? I'm going to put in a max width, right? And I'll make that be 600 pixels, right? And I'm going to put another one by saying and min width, and I am going to make that be 320 pixels. Okay, well, why would I do such a thing? Well, I'm going to explain it. In essence, what I want here, and you don't need the semicolon, sorry about that. I want to be able to make it so that, okay, these styles I'm about to write will kick in if my screen is at minimum 320 pixels and at maximum 600 pixels. So that gives me a range for different mobile devices to cover. So for example, the iPhone 5 has a much smaller width screen than an iPhone 6 or an iPhone 7 does, or even an Android device. So by putting it in this range, I'm pretty much guaranteeing that I'm going to cover the whole gamut of different mobile devices out there. Okay, so that's a smart move for me. So once I actually have this media query statement written, please don't forget to put in your opening and closing brackets. Okay, because if you remember, anything that's in between these brackets are going to override the styles that are set up above if my screen resolution, my screen width, excuse me, is in between 600 or 320 pixels. Okay, so now that being said, one way you can test this, and I always love doing this, okay, just to make sure it's working, is I could throw in a border real quick. So what I can do is I can say, all right, well, I know I have a lot of unordered lists in here, right? So I'll say every LI tag, right? Every UL tag, right? Maybe I'll say every header, every nav, every div. So all these tags, right, are going to have a border of 1 pixel, solid, and red, right? Now right now, so I'm just going to say save all. Oh, sorry, save all, okay? And then once I bring this page back in, right now you're not going to see that, okay? Because basically, right now I'm looking at it in a wider screen, but the way to test this, at least my favorite way, is if you're using Chrome, to kind of go in, sorry about that, to go in here and go under Tools and bring up, sorry, I just wanted you to be able to see that. Right, so my favorite way to do this here is to go in and sort of bring up my developer under Tools, Developer Tools, right? And then what you would do is you kick it into mobile view, okay? And now I can spread that back out a little bit. You'll see I have this set by default to 320 by 480, which is the size of a standard iPhone 5, okay? But you could see, okay, the whole thing is falling apart at this point, but you can see that the borders are there and they are coming up, which tells me my media query is working, okay? So that's a good sign, right? So, sorry about that. So now that I have that established, okay, what I want to do is, Jesus. Okay, so now that I have that established, what I want to do is I want to go back in. I don't need this anymore. Okay, I just wrote it so I could see if my CSS is working. I want to bring in my styles from above. Now, you could just copy them all, okay, but I find that if you copy them all, as you're going down the hierarchy of the HTML and you start editing, you're going to start things are going to be weird because of the fact that there's other styles below. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do this section by section. So I'll start off copying the body and all the way through the navigation, okay? And I'm going to leave the main section in place and things along those lines. I'll bring those in later, right? So I'll take that and I'll drag this all the way down to the bottom of my stack here. And I'm going to paste those first few styles in place, like so. Okay? So there's my first styles. Yeah? So now what I have to do is I have to look at this and I have to decide whether my image is actually working in the way I want it to work. So when we look at the styles that are in place, there's going to be some that we're going to have to override and some that we're not even going to need to touch. Okay, the ones we need to touch we can just delete in the media query because they'll be inherited from above. Whereas the ones we need to override, we'll need to put the new values in. So for example, the background image needs to change, right? So I need to change that image. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go here, right? And I'll say images slash, and I'll choose Boykins Mobile, right? So that's my new image, okay, on this layout, right? So that looks pretty good to me, okay? So next would be no repeat, but that's going to be inherited, so I don't really need that. So I'll just delete that. We're going to set background size to cover, okay? And I think I can let that guide too. The background color, fine. I have no issue with that. The font for Donna, fine. Don't need that. The font size is a little big, so I am going to drop this down to 10 points, okay? Just so I get a little smaller font on that. And the default color, it's white. It will be inherited. I'm fine with that. We also have our margins here of 0 and 0. I am going to keep that because that's going to be an important part for me moving forward, okay? And I think what else I'm going to do as well, and the overflow hidden, that's fine too. That will be inherited, right? What I do want to do as well is I kind of want to add this similar padding and margins, okay, on other tags that I use here. So I don't have to keep doing it, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say header, comma, main, comma, footer, and a div, right? And I will put in margin 0 and padding 0. This should become a general practice for you that you just always do it on block level tags in your HTML. Because by default they all have a border of 1 and it can become a pain in the butt after a while to keep going in and changing them and changing them and changing them again. Okay? So that being said, if I take a peek at this here, my HTML, I just want to see where I stand. So here's the section I'm working on now. I just did stuff on the body, right? So I'm going to start working on this header area here. Okay? So what I'm going to do, here's the style for that. I'm going to do something very similar. Okay? I'm going to go in and I am going to say, all right, here's header. Let me start changing the styles on this. So right now I have a width of 1,000. I'm going to change that to 100%. That way, my header is always going to be the full size of the screen, no matter what, right? And then I'm going to drop down the size a little bit, okay? And I'm going to drop the size down of the height. I don't know, I'm thinking maybe like 20 pixels or so, right? That way I can get a nice, clean sort of reaction to what I'm doing, okay? And now this border here is just so I can see what I'm working with, so I'll just blow that away. I also probably need to change the margins a little bit. So right now I have 15 on the top and the bottom and auto on the left and the right. I'm going to change that to 5 on the top and the bottom and auto on the left and the right. So I do have to override that value. Okay. Now this one's going to be a little bit important. Okay. So I have this float left here, right? So what I am going to need to do is I'm going to need to change some of this. So we still want to float this to the left. Okay, so I'm going to leave that in place. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a couple things here. I'm going to add a quick margin on that. Right, and I will make that margin be 5 pixels. So it's not riding right up against the edge of the screen like that. Okay, and that's a good sign. And then I'm going to change the width of it to 75 pixels. And the height to 25 pixels. Okay, so that's going to make the graphic be much smaller, because remember, what we're doing is we're affecting any image that's in the header. Now in our example, we only have one image in the header section, so this is a good thing. Okay, now normally I would say to you, you probably should go and make another graphic, right, and use CSS to put the graphic in place on the background on a block tag or something along those lines. Kind of what we did below with the menu of the circle graphics, the icons. But because I already have this in place and I'm not changing it by much, I think it's a pretty safe bet. I would say if you're changing the graphic size by more than 100 pixels, perhaps, maybe you should go in and do it differently. But if it's a small amount of change, I think it's fine to just change the width and the height of it, as long as you're careful about the proportions of the graphic and you don't stretch or manipulate the graphic. Okay? So now moving forward, okay, I have this nav here. Now if you remember, looking at our HTML really quick, this nav is the unordered list, right? Okay, so I'm going to start styling that. Clearly I have a list style type none. Don't need it, it'll be inherited, okay? So I have a 720 width. Now clearly that's not right, okay? So I'm not really sure how big I should make it at this point, because I figure the maximum, the smallest width is what, 320, right? So I don't want to make the navigation be 100%, but maybe 80%, right? So maybe I'll try 80% and see how that works out, right? And I'll stick the height at, I'll make it a lot smaller. So I'll make that maybe like 10 pixels. Oh, what is that? I got a punctuation error there, so I just fixed that, okay? So I have 10 pixels here. We're going to still float that to the right, so I don't need that, okay? The padding here, I kind of don't want any padding on the left, so I'll take that out too. And the padding on the bottom, that's a lot of pixels to pad the bottom, right? So I think I'm actually going to change that to 0, okay? That way, I got it's covered, right? And then I have this border on the bottom here. Now, in the actual mobile version, if you remember, here's the mobile mockup. I don't remember if I showed that before. I think I did. But we don't have that. So here's what we're building, okay, for the mobile version. Sorry if I didn't mention that earlier. But here's what we're building, okay? So I don't have that underline here, right? So what I'm going to do is, let me go back to my style here. I still got to have this in place, but I'm just going to make the border be 0. So that way there is no border, right? And that's going to work out quite well. So that being said here, I'm going to move it forward a bit, okay? So the next thing I'm going to deal with is each of these individual list items, right? So I have the whole nav here. Now I got to deal with the individual list items. Here they go, right? So what I'm going to do is I'll say list style type. Clearly that will be inherited. I'll delete that. We got this float left option going on here, okay? So maybe there's something weird with that. So let me try. I'll keep the float left for each of the. Oh, I need that. I'm sorry. I'm not thinking. We need the float left here because that's going to make our list go from a vertical list to a horizontal list, right? The margin on the right is clearly too big, right? So I'm going to drop that back to 0, okay? And actually, probably what I want to do is I want to make that, I don't know, let me make that like 3, right? And then I'll make margin top, no, margin left be 3 pixels, right? That way we have 3 pixels on each side of each list item. And then the margin top, what I'll do is I'll probably make that 0, okay? And then we are going to keep those as uppercase, so I'll take that text transform, but I'll let it inherit, so I'll just take it out, okay? All right? So that's going to get me a little closer, okay? And then finally we have this guy right here, okay, which is our last child. Now if you recall, okay, in our view here, the last list item was that search graphic that we were holding in place to put a real search in, okay? If you look at the mobile mockup doesn't have that. It's hidden. So what we're going to do is we're going to take that and we're going to make it be hidden in our style sheet. So what I'll do here is I have a margin left on this. I'm just going to blow that away. It doesn't really matter because it's going to be gone. And we're going to do a display : none. Now this is going to be the most common way that you hide elements that need to exist on a web page but not in the mobile version of the site, by doing a display none. So by doing this right now, I've kind of just synced this up somewhat, okay? And that seems to be looking pretty good. I am looking at this, and we may have to tweak this somewhat, okay? But I think that's pretty much the changes I need for the first part of this. So I'm going to stop this, and you can move on to the next video to get the second part, okay? Thank you.